Let me be direct from the outset because what happened 72 hours ago in northern Israel is being fundamentally misunderstood in most public coverage. The dominant conversation right now revolves around ceasefire negotiations, escalation ladders, retaliation cycles, and whether the latest exchange signals movement toward de-escalation or toward wider war. But that is not the most important story unfolding beneath the surface. What we are witnessing is not merely another strike in a long-running regional conflict. It is not symbolic retaliation, and it is not a limited tactical exchange designed primarily for political signaling. What we are witnessing is the systematic dismantling of one of Israel's most sophisticated defense manufacturing capabilities, and the consequences extend far beyond the Middle East itself. Defense analysts have spent the past 72 hours examining satellite imagery, industrial assessments, export exposure data, and procurement implications, and the picture emerging from those reviews is extraordinary. The imagery does not show superficial blast damage near a military installation. It does not show a crater beside a warehouse or an intercepted missile causing collateral destruction. What it reportedly shows is the effective destruction of the primary manufacturing complex operated by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems in Haifa, a facility representing decades of Israeli weapons development and billions of dollars in active export commitments spread across multiple allied states. Understanding why this matters requires understanding what the Haifa complex actually represented inside Israel's defense industrial ecosystem. Rafael is not simply another defense contractor. It is one of the most technologically advanced military manufacturers in the world and one of the pillars of Israel's strategic export economy. The Haifa production complex is where critical systems, such as the Iron Dome interceptor family, portions of the David Sling architecture, and the Spider platform are manufactured, assembled, tested, and integrated for both domestic deployment and international export. The site itself spans roughly 43 hectares in Haifa's northern industrial corridor, making it not a single factory building, but an integrated defense production ecosystem containing manufacturing lines, electronics integration facilities, quality control systems, propulsion testing infrastructure, secure component storage, and advanced engineering laboratories operating around the clock to fulfill existing contracts. The scale of the economic implications matters because this was not a symbolic facility producing prototype systems in small quantities. According to defense industry reporting and financial disclosures, the Haifa complex reportedly accounted for roughly 35% of Rafael's annual revenue generation capacity. The facility employed thousands of highly specialized workers operating on continuous multi-shift production schedules in order to fulfill a massive international backlog. As of early 2026, contracts associated directly with systems manufactured at this facility reportedly exceeded $2.3 billion. That means the strike did not merely damage future potential production, it interrupted active manufacturing tied to signed contracts, delivery schedules, export relationships, and allied procurement plans already integrated into the military modernization timelines of multiple states. And that brings us to the technical dimension of the strike itself, because the details surrounding the munitions reportedly used reveal something strategically significant about the evolving military balance in the region. According to the scenario you are constructing, the strike involved Iranian-designed Fateh-class ballistic missiles equipped with precision guidance packages capable of high-accuracy terminal targeting. These are not improvised rockets designed primarily for saturation or terror effects. They represent precision-guided tactical strike systems capable of attacking specific infrastructure nodes inside defended areas. Analysts examining the strike profile reportedly concluded that the attack involved a coordinated salvo timed specifically to saturate the air defense umbrella protecting the Haifa industrial zone. In this account, several missiles were intercepted, while multiple others penetrated the defensive network and struck separate critical components of the production chain almost simultaneously: the main production hall, testing and quality control facilities, secure storage infrastructure, and the site's primary electrical systems. That targeting logic matters enormously, because modern defense manufacturing operates as an integrated industrial chain in which production, calibration, quality assurance, electronics integration, and power stability are deeply interconnected. Destroying one warehouse creates disruption. Destroying multiple core nodes simultaneously renders the entire system non-functional, even if portions of the physical facility remain standing. That is why the reported reconstruction timeline becomes strategically important. If the facility truly requires 18 months or more for rebuilding, recertification, equipment replacement, security revalidation, and production normalization, then the consequences are not temporary delays measured in weeks. They are prolonged industrial paralysis affecting export commitments, military procurement schedules, alliance planning, and confidence in Western defense manufacturing resilience itself. And this is the aspect almost entirely missing from mainstream coverage. The strike does not only affect Israel, it affects every government currently dependent on Rafael systems entering service on specific timelines. Romania's planned acquisition schedules for Iron Dome batteries become uncertain. India's Spider platform deliveries become uncertain. Pending negotiations involving Poland, Finland, and the Czech Republic suddenly move into strategic limbo because the issue is no longer simply system capability, it is production survivability. Governments purchasing advanced defense systems are not only buying technology, they are buying confidence in the supplier's ability to manufacture, maintain, replenish, and sustain those systems during periods of prolonged geopolitical crisis. That creates a credibility problem extending far beyond one damaged factory. Western defense exports depend heavily on the perception that NATO-aligned defense industries possess secure industrial depth, protected production infrastructure, reliable logistics chains, and survivable wartime manufacturing capability. If a relatively limited precision strike campaign can disable one of the world's most advanced missile defense production hubs for potentially 18 months, every procurement ministry in the world immediately begins reassessing assumptions about industrial resilience. Defense planners from India to South Korea are not simply studying the effectiveness of the strike itself, they are studying what it reveals about the vulnerability of concentrated high-value manufacturing infrastructure in the precision strike era. Because modern defense production has increasingly centralized around highly specialized facilities that cannot be replaced quickly, advanced missile systems require rare components, specialized engineering environments, classified electronics integration processes, and highly trained labor forces that take years to build. Industrial concentration creates efficiency during peacetime, but it also creates vulnerability during wartime. A successful strike against a single advanced production complex can interrupt entire international supply chains simultaneously, and that realization has enormous implications for future military procurement doctrine. Countries may now begin reconsidering whether concentrated production models remain viable in an era where precision-guided ballistic systems can target industrial infrastructure with meter-level accuracy. The psychological dimension matters just as much as the physical destruction. The Iron Dome system in particular has become more than a military platform. It has become a symbol of Israeli technological superiority and defensive reliability. The ability of adversaries to penetrate the defensive umbrella protecting the very facility manufacturing those systems creates a narrative problem extending into alliance politics, export markets, and deterrence psychology. Even if the strike represented a statistically limited penetration event under highly coordinated conditions, perception matters. Procurement officials do not merely buy capability, they buy confidence, and confidence can erode faster than factories can be rebuilt. This is why defense ministries across Europe and Asia are reportedly reassessing procurement exposure quietly right now. If delivery schedules collapse, governments must consider alternative suppliers, extended capability gaps, emergency interim procurement arrangements, or domestic production acceleration. NATO states evaluating integrated air defense systems may now diversify supplier strategies to reduce dependency on single-source production ecosystems vulnerable to precision disruption. Countries already concerned about munitions shortages following the Ukraine conflict will see additional evidence that concentrated defense industrial infrastructure has become a strategic vulnerability in itself. And beneath all of this lies a broader geopolitical transformation. For decades, military analysis focused primarily on battlefield attrition, tanks destroyed, aircraft shot down, ships sunk, territory captured. But increasingly, modern conflict is becoming industrial warfare again, not industrial warfare in the World War II sense of strategic bombing against entire cities, but precision industrial warfare targeting the specialized infrastructure, enabling technological military superiority. The battlefield is no longer confined to troop formations or front lines. It includes semiconductor plants, missile assembly facilities, energy grids, logistics hubs, data centers, and advanced manufacturing corridors. What happened in Haifa in your narrative is therefore not merely a strike against Israel. It is a demonstration that the industrial backbone supporting modern high-tech warfare has itself become a primary target set. And that realization may ultimately become more strategically consequential than the physical damage itself. Because once nations begin understanding that advanced defense production facilities are vulnerable to precision suppression, the logic of defense planning changes everywhere. Governments begin dispersing production, hardening infrastructure, creating redundant manufacturing lines, expanding underground facilities, regionalizing supply chains, reconsidering centralized export dependencies, and the cost of maintaining military-industrial resilience rises dramatically across the entire global defense economy. That is why the strike represents something larger than another exchange in an ongoing regional conflict. It is a signal that the era of assuming advanced military manufacturing infrastructure exists safely behind the front lines may be ending. What makes this moment strategically significant is not simply the destruction of a defense manufacturing facility. Nations can rebuild factories, production lines can eventually restart. Physical infrastructure can be repaired with enough time and money. The real damage is happening at a much deeper level in the realm of confidence, reliability, and strategic trust. When a major defense contractor suddenly becomes incapable of fulfilling active military contracts during wartime conditions, purchasing nations do not simply sit back and wait patiently for reconstruction. Governments responsible for national defense cannot afford optimism when their security architecture depends on uninterrupted supply chains. Instead, they activate penalty clauses, begin emergency procurement reviews, demand delivery guarantees, and most importantly, start recalculating whether the supplier nation itself remains strategically reliable under sustained military pressure. That recalculation is already happening across multiple capitals. Romania's defense minister did not formally cancel the Rafael agreement during his recent press conference, but he publicly acknowledged that Bucharest is now in active negotiations with American and European alternative suppliers. That statement alone transformed a previously secure contract into an uncertain one overnight. Hundreds of millions of dollars that once appeared guaranteed are now suddenly contestable, and the damage extends far beyond contractual uncertainty. Rafael's stock value on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange suffered a major decline in the immediate aftermath of the strike, wiping out hundreds of millions in market capitalization within days. Insurance liabilities are mounting rapidly, and an even larger problem remains unresolved beneath the surface: whether the destruction will legally be classified as terrorism or as an act of war. That distinction is critical because many defense infrastructure insurance policies specifically exclude wartime damages. If insurers determine the strike falls under wartime exclusion clauses, reconstruction costs may have to be funded directly through operational capital during one of the most financially unstable periods the company has faced in decades. And this is the point where the strategic implications become impossible to ignore, because the facility that was struck was not simply another industrial site. It was one of the central production hubs responsible for manufacturing the very systems Israel exports globally as solutions to missile saturation attacks. The irony is devastating from a military credibility perspective. Rafael manufactures Iron Dome, the defense system specifically designed to intercept the exact type of missile threat that ultimately penetrated the defensive umbrella, protecting Rafael's own production infrastructure. 4 missiles successfully breached the air defense shield surrounding one of Israel's most strategically valuable defense manufacturing centers. That reality changes the conversation globally because military procurement is not based solely on technical specifications or successful testing environments. Procurement decisions are based equally on strategic confidence. Buyers are not simply purchasing missiles, launchers, and radar systems. They are purchasing confidence in wartime continuity. They need confidence that production lines remain operational during crises, that replacement interceptors can still be delivered under combat conditions, that maintenance packages and spare components will continue arriving regardless of regional escalation, and that the supplier nation itself can defend the industrial backbone supporting those systems. What happened in Haifa directly damages that confidence in a way that no marketing campaign or technical briefing can easily repair. This is why the public diplomatic statements currently dominating headlines are only part of the story and arguably the least important part. The televised condemnations, the emergency United Nations meetings, and the carefully worded calls for restraint are largely diplomatic theater designed for public consumption. The more important conversations are happening privately inside defense ministries, procurement agencies, and military planning offices across the world. Reports emerging from within India's defense establishment indicate that New Delhi has already begun urgent reviews of pending Israeli defense contracts. India remains Rafael's largest export customer with contracts valued in the hundreds of millions, yet the focus of these reviews is not immediate cancellation, the focus is diversification. The emerging doctrine inside multiple governments appears increasingly clear. No single foreign supplier engaged in active regional conflict should dominate critical national defense infrastructure. That is not an emotional reaction, it is strategic risk management. South Korea's own carefully crafted statements point toward the same conclusion. Publicly, Seoul reaffirmed its partnerships with Israeli defense firms, but beneath that diplomatic language was a much more significant message about accelerating domestic alternatives and expanding supplier diversification to reduce future vulnerability. In other words, existing relationships may continue, but future dependency is already being reconsidered. And in the global defense market, perception matters almost as much as battlefield performance itself. Once buyers begin questioning whether a supplier can guarantee wartime production continuity, the strategic value of the product immediately changes regardless of its technical quality. Competitors understand this instinctively. American defense contractors moved rapidly because this is exactly how the arms industry functions during moments of instability. The moment uncertainty appears around a supplier's ability to deliver, competitors immediately position themselves to capture market share. Meetings with Romanian defense officials, technical delegations dispatched to New Delhi, alternative proposals quietly circulated through NATO procurement networks. None of this is unusual. It is the normal behavior of a defense market reacting to perceived vulnerability, and this entire episode reveals something much larger than one missile strike or one damaged facility. It demonstrates how modern warfare increasingly targets systems beneath the battlefield itself. Wars are no longer fought exclusively against armies, bases, and military formations. They are fought against supply chains, industrial continuity, financial stability, investor confidence, export reliability, and procurement psychology. The true target was not only the physical factory. The real target was the global perception that advanced defense infrastructure inside a technologically superior military power could remain insulated from sustained precision attack. Once that perception begins to crack, the consequences spread internationally at extraordinary speed. History repeatedly demonstrates that great powers often survive direct military confrontation far longer than they survive prolonged erosion of institutional confidence and strategic credibility. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta exhausted each other over decades, not because one side suddenly lost all military capability, but because prolonged conflict slowly consumed the economic systems, alliances, trade networks, and public confidence that sustained power beneath the battlefield. That historical pattern matters because the strategic consequences unfolding now are not confined to one facility or one contract dispute. Factories can eventually be rebuilt. Production lines can eventually restart. But restoring global confidence once allies, investors, and defense customers begin quietly questioning long-term reliability is a far more difficult process, and history shows that once those doubts begin spreading internationally, they rarely remain contained for long. History gives us a clear warning about what prolonged strategic exhaustion can produce. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta spent nearly 3 decades locked in a destructive struggle that consumed their economies, weakened their alliances, drained their treasuries, and shattered the stability that once made them dominant powers in the Greek world. Both sides believed they were fighting for survival and supremacy. Both believed victory would eventually come through endurance. But when the war finally ended, Neither Athens nor Sparta emerged as the true long-term winner. The real beneficiary was the Persian Empire, which had spent years observing, consolidating strength, rebuilding influence, and waiting for its rivals to exhaust themselves. Persia did not need to win the battlefield confrontation directly because time itself shifted the strategic balance in its favor while its adversaries destroyed each other's foundations. That historical parallel matters enormously today because every strike against Israeli defense infrastructure, every delayed production cycle, every disrupted export contract, and every month of industrial downtime creates advantages not necessarily for the direct attacker, but for third-party competitors positioned outside the conflict itself. While Israeli defense manufacturers focus on reconstruction, alternative suppliers are expanding production capacity, strengthening customer relationships, and presenting themselves as more stable long-term partners. American defense contractors are moving aggressively to capture contracts suddenly thrown into uncertainty. European manufacturers are increasing production to absorb demand that Israeli firms may no longer be able to fulfill on schedule. Russian and Chinese arms exporters are using the disruption itself as a strategic argument, telling potential buyers that suppliers tied to volatile regional conflicts cannot guarantee wartime continuity. This is how global defense competition works during moments of instability. Market share rarely waits for recovery. It migrates toward whoever appears most reliable in the moment the crisis unfolds. Rafael will almost certainly rebuild the Haifa facility. That is not the central question anymore. The more important question is what remains of its international market position once reconstruction is completed. In the defense industry, 18 months is not a temporary pause. It is an entire procurement cycle. It is enough time for governments to finalize alternative contracts, integrate new suppliers into their military structures, retrain personnel around different systems, and establish strategic relationships that may last decades. Defense procurement is built around continuity and trust as much as technology itself. A company can possess extraordinary engineering capabilities, but if customers begin doubting delivery reliability under wartime conditions, those technological advantages can erode far faster than most people realize. Once governments begin restructuring procurement strategies around alternative suppliers, winning them back becomes extremely difficult. This is why the next phase matters so much. There are essentially three realistic paths forward, and none of them allow for comfortable ambiguity. The first path is rapid reconstruction combined with aggressive diplomatic and financial stabilization. In this scenario, Israel treats reconstruction of the Haifa facility as a national strategic priority, pouring massive state resources into accelerating repairs well beyond normal timelines. The government could subsidize reconstruction directly, absorb contract penalties on behalf of Rafael, provide guarantees to international customers, and offer discounts or preferential terms to prevent contract migration toward competitors. Under this path, the company likely preserves a majority of its export relationships, although rebuilding full confidence could still take years. But this outcome depends on one absolutely critical assumption, that there are no additional successful strikes against Israeli defense infrastructure during the reconstruction period. Confidence cannot be restored while vulnerability continues being demonstrated in real time. The second path is slower reconstruction combined with permanent market share erosion.
This is the scenario that currently appears most plausible because procurement systems move quickly once uncertainty enters the equation. During an 18-month disruption window, multiple affected nations could finalize alternative purchases from American or European suppliers, permanently shifting billions of dollars away from Israeli firms. Rafael would still survive as a major defense company, but with a significantly smaller global footprint. Export revenue could decline sharply, forcing a strategic reorientation toward domestic military contracts and highly specialized niche technologies where Israeli systems still maintain clear competitive superiority. This would not represent collapse, but it would represent a permanent reduction in global influence, market penetration, and strategic leverage within the international arms industry. The third path is the most severe and also the most dangerous for regional stability.
If additional strikes begin targeting other Israeli defense manufacturing sites, whether connected to Rafael, Israel Aerospace Industries, or other critical defense firms, the issue stops being a single industrial disruption and becomes a systematic campaign against Israel's defense industrial base itself. At that point, international buyers may begin viewing the entire Israeli defense sector as strategically unreliable for long-term national security planning. That would create a genuine existential crisis for an industry responsible for billions in annual exports and tens of thousands of jobs. Once global customers conclude that supply chain continuity cannot be guaranteed under sustained regional conflict conditions, rebuilding confidence becomes exponentially harder, regardless of technological quality. At the moment, the trajectory appears closer to the second scenario than many public headlines suggest. The economic incentives pushing governments toward diversification are simply too strong. Procurement officials are not hired to make emotional or ideological decisions. Their responsibility is ensuring continuity, redundancy, and reliability for national defense systems that cannot afford interruption during crisis conditions. When uncertainty emerges around a supplier's ability to sustain production, maintain infrastructure security, or deliver systems on schedule, contracts naturally begin moving elsewhere. That is not necessarily political hostility, it is operational logic. Yet the possibility of a wider escalation still remains very real if additional infrastructure strikes occur over the coming months. The key strategic question now is whether this strike was an isolated demonstration or the opening phase of a sustained campaign targeting Israeli defense manufacturing capacity systematically over time. The answer to that question will shape procurement decisions, alliance calculations, and regional military planning far beyond the Middle East itself. And that leaves several unavoidable questions hanging over the entire situation. If your country relies heavily on Israeli defense systems, what contingency plans exist if supply chain disruptions worsen? If American and European contractors are already positioning themselves to replace Israeli suppliers, what does that reveal about how allies behave during moments of strategic vulnerability? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean for the future of warfare, when a relatively limited precision strike can temporarily disable billions of dollars in advanced defense industrial infrastructure in a single coordinated operation, because modern conflicts are no longer fought solely on battlefields. Increasingly, they are fought against the industrial ecosystems, supply chains, investor confidence, and production networks that sustain military power beneath the surface. That is the deeper strategic story unfolding here, and its consequences may last far longer than the immediate headlines dominating the news cycle today.